If you've spent your life chasing success, checking every box, and still wondering, is this all there is? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Overachiever's Oracle podcast, a sacred space where we dive into the lives of professional women who've been taught to measure their worth by how much they achieve. Here, we explore a spiritually rooted path to untangle ourselves from hustle culture and reconnect with who we truly are. I'm your host, Dr. Giovanni Washington, a former overachiever turned liberation guide, and I'm here to walk you through this journey. Welcome to the show. Today, we're talking about the beginning of your liberation journey. This is a living, breathing process for coming back home to yourself. It's a journey that will unhook you from grind culture and perfectionism, and a journey that will silence all the voices telling you that you're not enough unless you're producing more, better, faster, now. This episode is about the power of defining liberation for yourself. But before we can define liberation, we have to understand why it's even necessary to do so in the first place. Liberation is a journey, not a destination. And the first real step on that journey is being able to tap into your own desires. Not what you've been told that you want, not what gets you approval, but what your spirit craves and what your body knows. And this is honestly no small thing. Colonialism has systematically severed us from our embodied knowledge. It's cut the cord between body, spirit, and ancestral wisdom. It taught us to mistrust our own sensations, to ignore our intuition, to overrule our desire for rest, and to question our own enoughness. And this disconnection was not accidental. It was a tool of control, designed to make us dependent on outside validation, disconnecting us from our own internal compass. And it also distanced us from the sacred technologies that our ancestors once carried as birthright. And this process of colonization informed rigid norms that told us what to believe, how to move, what to forget. It criminalized ancestor reverence. It called our healing herbs witchcraft. It turned sacred rituals into superstition. It made our drumming a punishable act. Our bodies became property. Our time became regulated. And our intuition erased. These were assaults on our internal guidance system. And we're still feeling the echo of these cultural losses. And here's what they don't want you to know. Reclaiming your ability to feel, to listen to your body, to your dreams, to your inner yes and your sacred no, it's not just important. These are imperative. I'd even go so far as to call this a revolutionary imperative. Reclaiming your ability to feel is a return to the power that has been stripped from you. It is ancestral, it is holy, it is a sacred restoration. This is what folks are talking about when they say ancestral healing. When you start tuning back into your own body, you begin healing not only yourself, but generations, backwards and forwards. You restore the flow of wisdom that has always lived in you. You interrupt colonial legacies by choosing you. And this journey begins with you defining liberation on your own terms. Because if you don't define liberation for yourself, the systems that thrive on extracting your labor, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, these systems will define it for you. And then they'll slap you in the face by calling it ambition. So let's bring this down from the abstract to the practical and to the personal. Like you, I've lived the quintessential overachiever's life. I've worn the titles, I've made the money, I've checked the boxes, and I still felt like I was vanishing inside my own life. And what's more than that, I've watched brilliant, wise, powerful women go down the exact same path. Not because they were broken, but because they were performing someone else's version of freedom. You leave the job, but you still worship the grind. You rest, but you feel guilty every second. You get promoted, but then you shrink to fit the room. You stop code switching, but you still tone yourself down to feel safe. You choose yourself, but you still need the applause to feel worthy. This is not freedom. It's freeish. And I want to be clear, freeish ain't free. It's just exhaustion with a prettier packaging. It's burnout with the softer chair. It's surviving with better branding. Now, I get it. The lie of freeish is seductive. It looks good on paper. It photographs well. It gets claps. But it costs you your soul. And real liberation, it's not always loud. It doesn't always look glamorous, but it feels like alignment. It feels like truth. It feels like a deep, cleansing California Ujjayi breath. And that's what we're here to build. And this is where the Liberate framework comes in. I've begun to think of the Liberate framework as a technology of freedom, because it's not just a checklist or a coaching tool. It's something that actually makes your life better. Now, clearly, we're reclaiming the word technology from its modern usage, and we're applying it in a more expanded sense. So this is a sense that, it reconnects us to ancestral systems of knowing and feeling and being. So when I use the phrase technology of freedom, I mean anything to help us live more fully, feel more deeply, and remember who we are. Because our ancestors didn't need machines to know the stars. Their technology was rhythm, ceremony, intuition, prayer. Their bodies were their first instruments. Their dreams were maps, and their altars were portals. And their healing, it was practiced, preserved, and passed on. This technology of freedom is a spiritual system rooted in ancestral wisdom, personal healing, and soul reclamation. This is a path that I've walked. It's a process I've guided others through, and it's how we untangle our worth from our work. This is how we move from performing to living. So it looks like this. First, we start by defining what freedom means to you. Then we illuminate what you've buried. We balance what's been out of harmony. Then we call in the wisdom that you need. You reclaim what was always yours. You create sacred space. You bless your transformation, and then you emerge, not just free, but reborn. Take a breath. Can you feel that? Is that your body saying yes? And once you start walking this path, you'll realize that defining liberation is only the beginning. Because once you name your freedom, you start to see how many other words were never truly yours. Words like rest, words like success, words like worth. What does rest look like when it's not something you earn, but something you embody? When it's not something that you have to steal in tiny pockets, but it's welcomed as a daily practice of remembering your humanity? What does success feel like when it's no longer tied to proving yourself, performing, or outworking pain? When in fact, success is measured in joy, in ease, and how deeply you know yourself? And what are you worth when no one needs you, when you're not producing, when you're simply being? These are not soft questions. These are sacred invitations. Each one is a thread, and when you start pulling them, the whole system begins to unravel. And that's the power of this technology of freedom. It doesn't just break the chains, it rewrites the meaning of the chain entirely. So let me tell you what it looks like when people choose real liberation over Freeish. An education professional that I worked with came to Liberation Alchemy with a wall full of degrees and a heart full of questions. By any measure, she was a consummate intellectual, and books were some of her best friends. And even though she had a hard time putting words to it, she knew that there was something inside, something deeper that was aching for attention. And as our work together unfolded, she began to realize that the more certifications and more degrees, the more external validation that she had, that wasn't actually going to bring her the peace and the ancestral connection that she was craving. So she began to consider that joy without guilt was not only possible, but possible for her. She adopted practices that prioritized her body wisdom instead of always deferring to her mind. She was learning to want what she wanted without needing to explain or justify it. So now, her days are shaped less by obligation and more by desire. She spends less time proving herself and more time being present. Around the same time, I was also working with a medical professional, and she was caught in what she called the spiritual hustle mode. She was always learning, always doing, but feeling very disconnected from her own spirit. She realized that she had been trying to do healing instead of being inside of it. And what she needed wasn't more tools. She needed permission to be, to rest, to weep, to feel her way home, to sit with the contradictions of wanting to be a wanderer with roots. Now she's guiding others not from a place of perfection, but from embodied truth. So if you're listening and feeling that stirring in your bones, wondering how you start coming home to yourself, here's what I'll say. Start with your lineage. Ask yourself, what did my people believe about freedom? What did they risk for joy, for wholeness, for love? What wisdom did they whisper when no one was watching? Your answers might not come all at once, because this is the work that unfolds as it unfolds. So your answers might arrive in dreams, in songs, in the ache behind your ribs when you finally sit still. Pay attention. That's a start. Then you can begin your practice, not because you have to, but because your spirit is hungry. Light a candle. Say your name like it's sacred. That's something we often ask in liberation alchemy is, how do we call your sovereign? So say your name like it's sacred. Pour a libation. Let stillness be a portal, not a punishment. And finally, trust your own sacred technologies. Your body is already talking to you. Your dreams are already showing you the way. Your intuition is not random. It is ancient. And yes, tools like divination help. That's why I created the Black Goddess Within Oracle deck, not to tell you who you are, but to remind you that you already know. So remember, liberation is not something you wait for. It's something you define. It is not something you earn. It is something you remember. And I feel like I just go ahead and say this every episode. You are sacred, not because of what you produce and not because of who approves of you, simply because you are. And these sacred technologies of freedoms will walk with you as you reclaim every part of you that the world tried to make you forget. So before we close today, I want to invite you, if it's safe, to take a moment, put your hand on your heart and ask yourself, what does freedom feel like in my body? That's the question this work begins with. And every step from here on out will help you live your answer.